Do you believe that H6 should be named in Parliament? Is there a public interest in that happening?
Look, I think the focus on an individual, whether it's H6 or whether it's Prince Andrew, misses the bigger story. The reality is, the story here is the fact that we're seeing a huge level of hostile state activity by the Chinese Communist Party towards the United Kingdom through this organisation called the United Front Work Department. And what it's doing is it's trying to exert influence, trying to spy on British businesses and individuals, and trying to really put pressure on the UK to support the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. That's what we need to be focused on, and that's what we need to be resisting.
There are members of the public, though, that believe they should be named. Is Nigel Farage, would he be right to name them?
Well, I think there's different MPs are going to make their own decisions on that. When I became Security Minister, I promised to keep the King's secrets, and I intend to do that. So I'm not going to be engaged in that, but others will have to make their own decisions.
The government says that the foreign influence registration scheme wasn't left in a fit state to be enacted. What's your response?
Well, that's simply not true. We left it in a state, in fact, where had the election come in November, which I think many of us were expecting, then it would have been in place before the election. The only thing we needed was a little bit more parliamentary time. Now, frankly, the government has been using parliamentary time very, very loosely. Today is another one-line whip, for example, so no urgent government business. They've had plenty of time to bring it forward. It's absolutely essential they do so. Anything else would be reckless, because we know that the foreign influence registration scheme that I designed in order to help in situations just like this would be absolutely perfect for making sure that we know what kind of influence is being put on British people, whether they're Prince Andrew, whether you as a journalist, or academics, or politicians, or business people.
So where does that claim come from then? Why are they saying it wasn't ready?
You'll have to ask the government. It's simply not true.
Should China be in that top tier?
Absolutely.
Of that scheme?
Absolutely. China should be definitely in that top tier, the so-called enhanced tier. And that's not just me saying it. MI5 have been calling for this very clearly for a number of years. And the reason they've been calling for it is, if you're looking for a needle in a haystack, first of all, you need a haystack. And what the first scheme does, the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, what it does is it builds up that sort of pattern of life. So you know the individuals who've been engaging with different organisations, which organisations have been targeted multiple times or over a long period of time, so that you can understand exactly what kind of pressure is being brought to bear. And then you can look at that and you can work out what the patterns are within the data. Now, as I say, you can't find a needle in a haystack unless you've actually found the haystack. And what the first scheme does is it builds up that haystack of data.
The Home Secretary says the relationship is extremely complex. It's a time where the government is trying to build a refreshed relationship with Beijing. There's obviously economic benefits. We need cooperation on things like climate change. Can you see that that would be extremely difficult to achieve should China be in the top tier affairs?
Absolutely not, no. The enhanced scheme doesn't stop any contacts, it merely makes them open, makes them public. Now, if you're trying to develop a relationship, quite rightly, with China in a way that is productive both for the United Kingdom and for China, isn't it best to do it with your eyes wide open? Now, if the government's position appears to be that the way to have a relationship with China is to lie down and to accept everything China says, to tolerate spying, to pretend that influence and pressure isn't a problem, that's not the way to represent the United Kingdom. That's the way to obey Beijing. Now, I'm not in the business of obeying Beijing. I've been sanctioned by Beijing because I will always stand up for the British people. Now, what the government should be doing is making sure they're standing up for the British people too, so that when we engage with China, we engage with our eyes wide open and we are with our defences ready.
The man has been identified by security services. He's been banned. Does that not eliminate that threat? Is that not dealt with at this stage?
Sorry, you're talking about one individual. I'm talking about thousands. And the reality is there's been a lot of focus, and I understand why, about Prince Andrew and this particular individual. But the truth is it's not about those two. It's about a much broader state of affairs. The United Front Work Department is funded with billions of dollars with the specific aim of gathering intelligence, of putting pressure, of exerting influence. And we're seeing it in the United Kingdom right now, today. We've seen it in academics. We've seen it in business. We've seen it when the Chinese consul beat up protesters outside Manchester, the Manchester consulate a few years ago. We saw it when we saw overseas police service stations in Glasgow, in Croydon. We have seen Chinese influence in the United Kingdom. That's exactly why we passed the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme into law and why we passed the new National Security Act. And that's why in the 2 years that I was the Security Minister, we arrested and charged more Chinese agents than the previous decade.
You mentioned a lot of what you've done, but this will have happened over almost 2 decades of Conservative government. This is not a new problem. What else should have happened?
Well, you will know that I was elected in 2015, and within 2 years I was chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee and calling this out. And from the very moment I got into government in 2022, I have been acting on this. So in the 2 years that I was in government, we have literally...
So other people in your party have let the country down then?
Well, I'm identifying what I did. You can extrapolate from onto whatever you want from that.
So it went wrong after you were in that position?
No, look, what happened was that from the moment I was in government in 2022, we passed the National Security Act and we introduced the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme. In 2 years in government, we've tightened up the laws on national security and on foreign influence more than they had been for a generation before. Look, the truth is, we have seen this pattern of hostile activity growing over time. I've been warning about it for a decade, and in the 2 years I was in government, I passed the laws that made us safer. The trouble we've now got is, despite having been left ready, the government simply hasn't brought them in. Now, you can make party politics out of it if you like. I'm just trying to keep the British people safe.
And what would your message to China be right now?
Well, I don't need to have a message to China.
But if you were in that position, if you were in the position of being the one that had to have a message for China, what would you say?
My business is not to lecture any other government or to lecture any other sovereign state. I have no message for China. My message is for the British government. I'm a representative of the British people, and my job is to influence the British government. The Chinese government will do what it does. My message to the British government is now is the time to make absolutely certain that our defences are in place. Anything less would be reckless, and that's why we need China in the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme now, and why we need to be using all the powers in the National Security Act to keep Britain safe and prosperous for the decades to come.